The sirens screamed through the quiet neighborhood of Elmwood Heights just after midnight. Red and blue lights painted the white walls of a small two-story house on the corner of Cedar Avenue. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering in confusion. Inside, two officers froze in the narrow hallway, their flashlights trembling slightly as they landed on what they saw. A young girl, no older than 16, was lying motionless on the floor, her skin pale, eyes open, staring blankly at the ceiling fan that still turned slowly above her. One of the officers knelt beside her and whispered, "My God, what happened to her?" The girl's name was Sylvia Likens. Detective Mark Hensley arrived minutes later, his face grim but focused. He'd seen many crime scenes in his 15 years on the job, but something about this one felt different. The air was heavy, not just with death, but with cruelty. There were bruises, scratches, signs of a struggle that told a story no one in that quiet street ever imagined existed. "Call the coroner," Mark said, his voice tight. "And don't touch anything." As the house filled with investigators, the walls seemed to whisper secrets. Photos of smiling faces hung crookedly on the walls. A half-eaten meal sat on the kitchen table, as if life had paused suddenly. The neighbors told police that the family who lived there, the Carsons, had always seemed normal, ordinary, even. But as Mark began his investigation, he'd soon find that inside that ordinary home, darkness had been living for months. 2 days earlier, Sylvia had been seen walking home from school, clutching a small notebook and humming softly. She was shy but polite, a junior at Franklin High who loved writing stories and sketching in the margins of her books. Her best friend, Amy Doyle, walked with her halfway, as they always did. "You're still staying with the Carsons, right?" Amy asked. "Yeah," Sylvia said, forcing a smile. "Just till Mom gets back from the road. You know how it is." Her mother worked as a traveling nurse, often leaving Sylvia and her younger sister in the care of family friends. The Carsons, especially Mrs. Carson, a stern woman in her late 40s, had offered to take Sylvia in for a while. What Sylvia didn't know was that Mrs. Carson's kindness hid something far more sinister. When Sylvia arrived home that day, she noticed the door slightly open. Inside, Mrs. Carson sat at the table, a cigarette burning slowly between her fingers. "You're late," she said flatly. Sorry. "The bus." "Don't lie to me." Mrs. Carson stood up, her shadow stretching long across the floor. There was something in her eyes, cold and calculating. Sylvia lowered her gaze and whispered, "It won't happen again." Mrs. Carson smiled faintly, then said, "It better not." That night, Sylvia wrote in her notebook, "I miss Mom. I don't like this house. Sometimes I hear them talking about me when they think I'm asleep. I want to go home." But she never got the chance to send that note. Back in the present, Detective Hensley sat in the dimly lit police station, flipping through Sylvia's notebook. Every word felt like a cry for help that had gone unheard. The Carsons claimed it was an accident, that Sylvia had fallen down the stairs. But Mark didn't buy it. Not for a second. He'd already noticed inconsistencies. The angle of her injuries, the timeline of the neighbors' reports, and the silence of the younger Carson children who avoided eye contact. Something didn't fit. "Sir," Officer Perez said, entering the room. "You might want to see this." He handed Mark a small USB drive found in the Carsons' basement. "What's on it?" Perez looked uneasy. "You'll want to see it for yourself." Mark plugged it into the computer. The screen flickered to life. At first, it was just static. Then, a shaky video. Sylvia was sitting in a chair, crying softly. A voice behind the camera, Mrs. Carson's voice, said, "Tell them you're sorry, Sylvia." Sylvia whispered, "I didn't do anything." Then the video cut off. Mark's blood ran cold. He looked up at Perez. "Get me a warrant. Now." As dawn broke over Elmwood Heights, the Carsons' house was surrounded by police cars. Neighbors gathered, whispering. Cameras rolled. Mrs. Carson stood on the porch, her arms crossed, a faint smirk on her lips. "This is ridiculous," she said. Mark walked up the steps, holding the warrant. "You're under arrest for the murder of Sylvia Likens." For the first time, her smirk faltered. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, a sound came from inside the house, a door creaking open. Everyone turned to look. From the shadows of the hallway stepped one of the Carson kids, trembling, clutching a piece of paper. "Detective," he whispered, "there's something else you need to see. She told us it wasn't over." Mark frowned. "What do you mean?" The boy handed him the paper. On it, in Sylvia's handwriting, were 3 words written in pencil. "She's not done." The detective froze. "What do you mean? She's not done," he asked, looking around the quiet house as the air grew colder. And then, somewhere upstairs, a door slammed shut by itself. Detective Mark Hensley stood frozen at the base of the stairs, staring up into the dim hallway above. The sound of the door slamming still echoed faintly through the old Carson house. Every officer in the room was silent. The boy who handed him Sylvia's note clung tightly to his sleeve, his voice trembling. "She used to say things," the boy whispered. Before she was gone. She said Mrs. Carson wasn't who she said she was." Mark knelt down slowly. "What do you mean, son?" The boy's eyes darted to the staircase. "She said Mrs. Carson had another name, and that she was hiding from someone." Mark exchanged a glance with Officer Perez. "Let's clear the upstairs," he ordered. They moved carefully, flashlights cutting through the shadows. The house creaked under their boots, old wood groaning as if the walls themselves remembered everything that had happened here. At the top of the stairs, they found the door that had slammed. It led to Sylvia's small bedroom. Mark pushed it open. The room was cold. The window cracked open even though the October air outside was freezing. A notebook lay open on the bed, pages ruffled by the breeze. He stepped closer and saw the last words Sylvia had written before she died. "If something happens to me, it's because of her. She said she'll make me disappear like the others." Mark's heart sank. "The others," he murmured. Perez stepped beside him. "Sir, we need to find out if there are any other missing persons connected to this woman." Mark nodded grimly. "Run her background. Every alias. Every move she's made in the past 10 years. 2 days later, in the gray light of morning, the Carson house was sealed off with crime tape. Mrs. Carson sat in the interrogation room, her hands cuffed to the metal table. Her face was calm, too calm. Mark entered, closing the door behind him. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Mrs. Carson," he said, dropping a folder onto the table. "Starting with this." He flipped open a photo of another girl, same age as Sylvia, reported missing 2 years earlier from another town. Her name was Megan Fields. Mark leaned forward. "You worked as a caretaker in her neighborhood, didn't you?" Mrs. Carson smiled faintly. "I work with many families. You can't expect me to remember every child I meet." Mark slammed his hand on the table. "She disappeared under your watch, just like Sylvia." For the first time, her eyes flickered with something cold. "You think you know what happened, detective, but you don't. Sylvia wasn't innocent." Mark froze. "What did you just say?" "She wasn't what she seemed," Mrs. Carson said softly. "She was sneaky. She found things she shouldn't have. That girl had a way of finding secrets." Mark leaned closer. "Whose secrets?" Mrs. Carson's smile widened, but she said nothing. That evening, Perez rushed into Mark's office. "Sir, you'll want to see this. We traced Mrs. Carson's real name. She's not who we thought." He handed Mark a document. At the top, Evelyn Emma Rhodes, wanted in 3 states for fraud, identity theft, and suspected involvement in a string of disappearances from foster homes in the late 2000s. Mark rubbed his forehead. She reinvented herself as Mrs. Carson, moved here, and started over. Perez hesitated. "There's more. We found something buried in her backyard." Mark's stomach turned. "What?" "A metal box. Inside were pictures of other children." Mark stared at him. "How many?" "5. They returned to the Carson house that night with a full forensic team. The ground in the backyard was damp and soft from the recent rain. As the floodlights illuminated the area, an officer called out, "Sir, over here." Mark hurried over. The officer pointed at the dirt, where something white was sticking out of the ground. They dug carefully and uncovered a small human bone. Mark's throat tightened. "Get the coroner." He turned away, looking toward the dark windows of the house. Inside, something moved, just a flicker of shadow at the window of Sylvia's old room. Perez followed his gaze. "You saw that too, didn't you?" Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did." The next morning, the town of Elmwood Heights was in shock. News of the case spread fast. "Foster mother arrested in connection to teen's murder," the headlines read. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Sylvia's note, "She's not done," echoed in his mind. That afternoon, a lab tech rushed into his office, pale as a ghost. "Detective, we finished checking the video drive." Mark frowned. And there were more files. Hidden ones. Encrypted. He handed Mark a printout showing a list of timestamps. The dates stretched back months. "She recorded more than just Sylvia," the tech said quietly. Some of these videos are from years ago, and there's one more from last week, after Sylvia's death. Mark's eyes widened. That's impossible. She's been in custody since the arrest. The tech nodded nervously. I know, but the file was created at 3:12 a.m. yesterday. Mark plugged the drive into his computer. The file opened. The video was dark at first, the camera shaking. Then, slowly, the image came into focus. It was the Carson house. The same hallway. The same staircase. And then, Sylvia's voice. Detective Hensley, she's not done. Mark's blood ran cold. He slammed the laptop shut and stood up, his mind spinning. Get a team to the house. Now. When they arrived, the front door was open, swinging gently in the wind. The air inside was freezing, and the lights flickered as if the power was failing. Mark moved through the hallway, flashlight in hand. Everything was exactly as they had left it, except for one thing. Sylvia's notebook was now lying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. He picked it up slowly. The last page had new writing on it, fresh pencil marks pressed hard into the paper. She's still here. Perez whispered, What does that mean? Mark looked up at the staircase, where the shadows seemed to shift ever so slightly. It means, he said quietly, we didn't find everything. As he said it, a faint sound echoed from upstairs, a slow creak, like footsteps. Every officer froze. Perez whispered, Is someone up there? Mark raised his gun. Stay behind me. They climbed the stairs, step by step, hearts pounding. At the top, the door to Sylvia's room was ajar again. Light flickered beneath it. Mark pushed it open and gasped. On the wall, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, Evelyn didn't kill me. She opened the door. The flashlight slipped from his hand and hit the floor, the beam spinning wildly across the room. Perez swallowed hard. What does that mean, sir? Mark's voice was barely a whisper. It means someone else was here. And then, from the closet behind them, came a quiet click, like the sound of a latch unlocking. The officers turned toward the sound, and the screen went black.